Welcome to the Kintsugi Hope podcast. It's great to have you with us. We are joined by some amazing speakers and experts who have experienced, like all of us, life's ups and downs. If you want to find out more about Kintsugi Hope, then please do head to the website kintsugihope.com.
Hello and welcome back to the Kintsugi Hope podcast. My name is Rachel Newham and I am going to be hosting it for a little while. I'm the Mental Health Friendly Church Project Manager. And I'm thrilled that we're continuing this series on the truth about, because we're so aware that there are loads of myths around faith and around mental health, and probably even more myths around faith and mental health. So we wanted to kind of give a bit of space to explore that over the next couple of months. And I'm absolutely delighted that we have Thea Joshi, who works for a national mental health charity and has loads of knowledge and wisdom to share with us about OCD. So thank you so much for joining us, Thea. And yeah, would you be able to start, I guess, by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, wow, that was quite an intro. Gosh, I feel the pressure now. So yeah, I'm Thea. I live in Nottingham with my husband, and we lived in London for many years before that. As you said, I work for a national mental health charity, and I don't really know what else to say. Like walking, like eating, like hanging out with friends, the usual stuff. Yeah.
Nice, cool. And I guess the topic, so OCD is something I probably hear I'm so OCD more times in a week than I care to count. And I always say to people, say it out loud without the kind of anagram, and it makes no sense as a sentence. So OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. What is it? What does it mean? What does it look like?
Yeah, okay. So, and I feel like I should disclaim this by saying I'm not a mental health professional. This is my experience, my understanding, which may be limited in some areas, so don't quote me on any of this. But from what I know, so OCD is an anxiety disorder. It's grouped under the anxiety disorder sort of umbrella. And as you might have guessed, it involves obsessions and compulsions. And so it could be centered around obsessive thoughts, which is like a huge range of things, from anything from, what if I leave my straighteners on and the house burns down? What if I catch germs from someone and pass them on and someone dies? What if I'm a paedophile? What if I push that person in front of a train? So really distressing what if thoughts. And obviously there's lots of topics we can group them under. So we might talk about contamination OCD, relationship OCD, checking OCD. And so those are your kind of obsessive thoughts, and they're like the trigger. And then we all have, the majority of people, they've done research, the majority of people in the society who do not have any mental health diagnosis have those obsessive intrusive thoughts, is what we would call them. So you might have that thought and you're like, oh, that's weird. Oh, well, and then you carry on with your day. And the difference is that in someone with OCD, that then kind of can take root and fester and become something that is very, very real. And in response to the distress that causes, you then enter into compulsions and compulsive behavior. So I'm going to give you an example. When I was a kid, I went through a stage of really worrying that I was going to sort of shoplift and not really remember it, but I was going to do it. It's going to be awful. I was going to be arrested. My life would be ruined. Follow that thread through. So the compulsion there was to, keep my hands in my pockets in any shops, not touch anything, not pick anything up, get home, get my parents to check my pockets in case there's anything there, which I realise sounds really odd, like really weird. Like, how on earth does that work? But I think sometimes we don't understand that the compulsive behaviours, which can on the outside look really weird or unusual or odd, or, are driven by really major distress and anxiety. So yeah, that was a really long answer to the question. There's lots more I could say on that. But yes, that's a little taster of OCD.
I think that's really helpful. And I think when I was, from what I've known about it and what I've read about it, it's that thing, understanding that actually OCD is an anxiety disorder, first and foremost. And it's the anxiety that drives the obsessions and the compulsions. And so actually that that really helped me to understand it better, that it's not this stuff coming out of the blue. It's driven by anxiety, and actually we all do stuff sometimes that's a bit weird or unusual when we're anxious. I was watching an episode of the sitcom Modern Family the other day, and one of the characters goes in and he has like a pre-game, he's a football coach, and he has like pre-game rituals. So he like has to kick over a bucket and have the same breakfast. And I think we all have those in a really tiny scale. We have those things that we do to make ourselves feel better about the fact that the world is really uncontrollable. And in the same way, I guess that, you know, depression is exaggerated, kind of over outside the normal human experience of sadness. OCD is that of those kind of little things that we do and have and experience in our everyday lives.
Yeah, and I think also people talk about OCD. I think probably like any mental health condition, it's about kind of how much it's getting in the way of your life. So, and as you say, the distress driving it. So if I just like things neat, I'm clearly not a bit OCD, which is a ridiculous phrase, as you said, because it's just because I like it neat. I don't think anything awful is going to happen if things aren't neat. I'm not doing it because I'm really anxious inside. I'm just doing it because I like things neat. And actually, in my case, I don't. I'm very untidy, which people always find amusing, blah, 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 because of stereotypes about OCD. But yeah, I think it's also about how much distress is it causing you in your life? Are you able to function? You know, if you're checking the door once, that's kind of normal and probably not going to impede on your day. If you're having to check the door 40 times before you can leave the house, it's going to impact on your life. You know, so there's a level of also kind of acuteness, severity there. But yeah.
I think that's a really important point actually to make about mental illness more broadly, is that actually, and I guess clinically, you know, it's not just having the feelings and the extent to which they impact your day that kind of makes it, whether it's a mental illness or kind of just something you struggle with. It's a really important reminder to us all that, you know, again, you know, being a bit anxious doesn't make you have an anxiety disorder. But actually, when your anxiety is impeding your life and stopping you being able to live a full and meaningful life, that's when it becomes something that, you know, might need outside help, might need kind of extra help and treatment. And as I guess I said at the beginning, you know, there are a lot of myths around OCD. You know, people would say I am openly quite obsessive, but I don't have OCD. You know, I have rainbow organized bookshelves. They took me a really long time. That was quite an obsessive process, but that takes joy.
Great, well done you. I'd love that. I'd love to be like that.
And I think that is such that important thing, that actually being obsessive and having OCD are completely different things. And why do you think there are so many myths around OCD? And perhaps can you kind of myth bust some of the most common ones for us?
Oh dear. Oh, can I do that? So I think, as we've said, in terms of myth busting, you know, this idea that OCD is about cleanliness or neatness just isn't true. And like, I'm part of a support group for OCD, and when you actually hear people's stories, you realize that yes, contamination and fear of germs is definitely a very real and very terrifying part of it for some people, but so many other people are just like, no, that doesn't bother me at all. I'm fine. It's actually this thing that destroys my life, kind of thing. So I think people have just got really weird ideas about what OCD looks like. And that's a problem. And I think the thing is, it's not just saying like, don't be mean about people with OCD because it makes us feel rubbish. It's that because there's a lack of information and there's so much misinformation, people don't know they have OCD, and so they don't get treated. And so many times I've heard, and I had this as well, but other people saying, I didn't get diagnosed for 10, 20, however many years because I just thought there was something wrong with me. I didn't have any kind of label I could put on it to say, oh, this is like a normal thing that other people feel, because it didn't look like switching on the light and switching it off, you know, 10 million times. Like, that was my experience. And that's not to diminish that, because that's awful. It's not saying, oh, this is harder. It's just saying it looks different, and we haven't seen that kind of presentation portrayed in the media or the arts or whatever. And so people just don't know what's wrong with them. They're wrong. But, you know, they don't. They just think something's wrong and I'm very upset and I don't know how to deal with life. So that's something. But I think the reason maybe there are lots of myths around it is, you know, that we do see these portrayals in the arts and in cultural media of the behaviours, and so that's what people understand as OCD. So the continuous hand washing, for instance, is something that people might use as an example on a show or whatever, and that's fine, but it doesn't give you the actual information about what's going on for that person, what's driving it. Again, that it could look like lots of other things, and again, that you might not be able to see a compulsion happening. So for me, the majority of my compulsions have often been mental, kind of internal. So you wouldn't notice that I was doing a compulsion in my head, but I am, because I'm, you know, replaying a scenario again and again and again. Or people who say, for instance, count in their heads, you know, you might not see them doing it. So I think a lot of it is internal, and we can't see that, so we don't know about it. I think finally that people, the myths around any mental health problem are busted as we understand more about it, right? So I think there would have been a lot more. I think there have always been myths around, for instance, depression or anxiety, but as people have talked about them, we've seen those myths reduce, and now people are like, okay, I actually have a vocabulary to talk about something like depression and how it might present, how it might feel, whereas we don't have that as much as with OCD and other mental health problems. So I think it is about talking about it. It is about sharing real experiences and saying this is how it kind of affected my life, and just uncovering the myths in that way, if that makes sense.
I think that's such an important point, actually, because we do know more about depression and anxiety now. And it is because we've talked about it for certainly in the last 10 years that I've been in this sort of mental health awareness faith space. People talk about it far more than we do before. And I guess depression and anxiety are the ones we talk about most because they are the most common. And now we've got to do the work all over again with the other mental illnesses experience. And I guess from a faith position, actually, that's a whole other thing. We tend to be catching up a little bit, and there's more kind of theologies and explorations of faith around depression and anxiety. I wrote an article this week for Women Alive around does having anxiety make me a bad Christian? But actually we need that kind of that media output as well to explore it more fully. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how OCD kind of impacts your life, but also your faith, and what the relationship between those things are.
Yeah, so I'll try and give you the short version. I'm trying not to give you the story of my life according to OCD. But I think, as we said, I think it's important to share some of it because my symptoms maybe looked different from what we've seen. And if I can share it and people go, oh, I just thought that was me being weird, then that could help. So it's been part of my life in some ways since probably I was about 9 or 10, like not, as we said, it may be at that kind of diagnosable level, but sort of unusual thoughts that most people don't worry about, being very anxious about things. As I said, I used to worry about stealing. I used to worry about really cheating on exams. And, even now I can look back on it and go, that was a bit weird. Like, why did you worry about that? Which is probably how the rest of the world sees it. But again, when you're in it, it doesn't feel like weird. This is real. This is not a theoretical, like, oh, what if this weird thing happened? This is a real present threat in my life. This could happen at any moment now and I'm not safe. It's that kind of feeling of anxiety and distress. Got through teenagers, up and down, and I got to about 17, and that's when I was diagnosed because things had reached a real peak. It was really affecting my life in terms of being able to sit exams, and being able to, socialize, do normal life, get myself to college, all of that kind of thing that people take for granted. I had CBT multiple times, recovered a bit, relapsed a bit. OCD has led to me taking some time off work briefly. I avoided a lot of social situations, including really precious time with, family and friends. And I think for any mental health problem, OCD included, there's a lot of loss there that we face. So I think that that's something to explore, is like just acknowledging what we've lost and what we've missed out on because we weren't well enough. So that's something. But yeah, I think in terms of how it's affected my faith, as you might expect, like with any kind of suffering, it has a massive effect, because you're praying and praying, and for instance, in this situation, praying for healing, or praying for a reprieve, praying for peace, and you just sort of feel like God's not listening, or like if he is, he's not doing anything. If he loves me and he can see how hard this is, why would he just let it carry on being like this? And then I think, at church you hear things about there's no fear in love, perfect love casts out fear. And I still, even now, I'm like, what does that mean? And like, what does that mean in the face of anxiety? And I believe that Jesus loves me and his spirit lives in me, but still, what does it mean then that I could still be terrified like this, even though I believe, I'm secure in God's love, I'm saved, however you want to phrase it, I'm still really terrified right now. And I don't know how I reconcile those two things, and people say about suffering refining you, and it's like, I don't feel refined, I feel like I'm being burned up. And so it brings out loads and loads of questions. And I think for me, having things like the Psalms has been a real anchor. I know lots of people speak about that, in just putting words to our pain and our questions, like the psalmists aren't afraid to just say that things are really awful and like, God, where are you? But I think at the moment I'm in a much better place, and that's amazing. It feels miraculous, to be honest, given how I was a few years ago. And so I'm always nervous to say that, because I feel like, I know it can come back. It's come back many times. I know it can come back again, and it's not gone, but it's just like not driving the car, if that makes sense. It's kind of in the background. But I just think from this place, I can really say I've seen God's goodness. I've seen his faithfulness at work, and I still don't understand it. Like, I don't understand all of what's happened and what still goes on, but I know that Jesus is the one that suffered for me, but also with me. And I think that's amazing, and brings so much comfort that he gets it. He's resurrected, but he still bears the wounds. And that's like the biggest comfort, I think, is that he gets it, and he's not a stranger to suffering. He's not above it. So that was a very long answer. Sorry.
No, that's great. And I think it's so important, actually, that we're able to wrestle honestly and openly. And that sense that, one of the kind of, we've just had Easter, and Jesus in Gethsemane, the fact that he sweated with blood was an extreme anxiety reaction.
Yeah.
And I think, I end up banging on about language a lot, but I think that language between anxiety and fear is really important, because fear is often what we feel, but anxiety is what our minds and our body is a reaction. We can't necessarily control when our body goes into fight or flight. We can tools to mitigate it and tools to help lessen that impact. But when your body and your mind are terrified, they're going to react. And actually, that's God-given. A long time ago, we ran away from like lions and stuff. Where our body manifests that was really helpful for the lions, and less helpful for exams. Agreed. And I guess, is there something that kind of, as we come into land, what would you say is one of the most important things to understand about OCD if we're trying to help somebody, if we're trying to come alongside? Are there, often in these situations it's easier to say stuff not to do rather than to do, but are there any really particularly helpful or things that are particularly unhelpful if we're trying to support somebody who is struggling with OCD?
That's a great question with like a million answers, all of the things that you should and shouldn't do. And again, will be different for everyone, because there's loads of different situations, but I think I'll give you a couple of don'ts and then one do. Does is that allowed? I know you said one, but here we are.
No.
I'm just going to keep talking. So I think one don't would be just be not so much a don't, but be conscious of the way you are sharing scripture with people. I really think we should share scripture to encourage each other, but equally being conscious of, as you said, about verses about anxiety and how they can feel like a burden around, like, don't worry, which was never how they were intended to be. And stuff around this, the stuff I'd love to explore about what does Jesus mean when he talks about like thoughts and our thought lives being really important, and how do we reconcile that with an OCD brain that brings horrible thoughts into our minds that we can't control. So just being conscious of the way that we do that. One big kind of don't, or something that's unhelpful for people in general with OCD, is just that this thing of reassurance. When someone is really anxious, we want to reassure them. We want to do anything we can to make them feel better. So for my parents, they wanted to check my pockets, even though they saw it was irrational, because they just didn't want me to be so scared. They wanted to just tell me it's fine, you're not a bad person. And actually that's really fuels OCD. So that's just a flag up to anyone who is living with someone who's got OCD. Just, it's really difficult, but not fueling that reassurance. And then the thing I would say to do is just, it sounds really obvious, but just listen and care. So really basic, but can be hard when you don't understand what's going on and like why this person is so anxious. And they might not feel able to tell you because there's an awful lot of shame in OCD. So what I just say is, you don't have to understand to care and love people. I didn't want to have to explain everything that was going on in my mind. It was too scary, it was too shameful. But people still were able to get alongside me and say, that's okay, I'm just going to love you and pray for you and just distract you, do normal things with you, be your friend. And that's all I needed. So yeah, I just say you don't have to understand someone to love them well. Yeah. Sorry, that was a lot of things.
No, I think it's so helpful to have a bit of a framework, because when something's so outside of an experience that we're familiar with, it is really hard to know how to help, and often people feel like, oh, I need to be an expert in order to make a difference. And that's just not true. We need mental health professionals and mental health experts in the world, but people need friends as well. And friendship, I think, is something that Jesus showed to the people that he came into contact with. He sat down and had dinner with people, and he listened to them. I always think of the friends on the road to Emmaus, and that he could fix everything for them in an instant. And actually he said, what's wrong? And I'll walk with you. And I just think that's such a beautiful picture of how we can walk alongside one another, really. Thank you so much for joining me. That's been absolutely
not at all.
Just really helpful, I think, to try and get a better understanding of something that affects so many people, but is so often misunderstood. Thank you so much. I will pop your Twitter and stuff in the show notes, and thank you so much for joining us.
No worries, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us at the Kintsugi Hope podcast. It's been great to have you with us. If you want to find out more about this amazing charity that creates safe and supportive spaces for those that are experiencing social isolation or poor mental health, then do check out the website kintsugihope.com. We'll see you on the next episode.